we've remote viewed this. We've tried to track down all of the data leading up to a reveal at the end of this episode about whether this vision was actually real. And we've got a lot of data along the way to kind of unravel with you guys to go on this story with us. I mean, it's pretty strange, but he's doing a lot of work to have it rewritten into the history of what really happened at that battle.
It's cracking. Yeah, the other evidence begins to crack the narrative. Well, you know, the victor writes the history books, so you know, you might as well make yourself look good.
And so what, John, I think you guys looked into this vision, like what happened here? Emperor Constantine was said to have had a vision of something in the sky which convinced him to convert to Christianity, or at least that's how the tale goes. But what was the whole story? After the Battle of the Milvian Bridge between Constantine and Maxentius, the Arch of Constantine was erected to celebrate his victory. But we wanted to know, why were pagan scenes depicted in the arch? Were the old gods' ways secretly incorporated into Constantine's rule? The ruling elite at the time were devout followers of the cult of Mithraism, so who was Constantine really loyal to? When we started uncovering historical discrepancies, sun worship, Zoroastrianism, and evidence of bull sacrifice, it brought into question the mainstream stories of Constantine. Has the ruler been put on a pedestal and actually become a figure of worship today, adopted from even older objects of devotion?
From me, John Vivanco, and investigative research from Rob Counts, your mind is seriously going to be blown with this. So join the Metaphysical Podcast for a show that's out of this world. Are you listening to the Metaphysical Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else? Leave us a 5-star rating and review. It's going to help us a lot to reach more people. And remember, you got to like, follow, and subscribe on YouTube, Rumble, Ganjing World, Twitter, and Facebook.
Hey, John, how you doing?
Hey, good, doing good. This is going to be a good one. I'm like kind of chomping at the bit here, just a tiny bit, because there's so much like packed into this whole thing, which is just mind-blowing.
Yes. Yeah. Constantine, the first emperor who professed Christianity. Some call him the first Holy Roman Emperor, though that term could be debated. For those of you that don't know, Emperor Constantine was considered to have been the first to profess Christianity and had this fabled vision at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, with a definitive defeat over Maxentius, the emperor. And so the real question here is, was Constantine, a Roman emperor, really a devout Christian that everyone believes him to be? And keep watching, because at the very end of this video, we're going to we've remote viewed this. We've tried to track down all of the data leading up to a reveal at the end of this episode about whether this vision was actually real. And we've got a lot of data along the way to kind of unravel with you guys to go on this story with us. Okay, so what happened back in the day is how Rome was set up. The Roman Empire was spanning across the southern part of Europe, like all across it, you know? And so we're talking about a massive land area. There's 3 rulers. There's Constantine, his dad, who was out there in York, England, for whatever reason. And then in the center, Maxentius, like a very powerful general, was ruling. So Constantine's father dies. His father dies. He gets word of it, and it's on. So Maxentius and Constantine now are at odds with one another for who's going to rule what lands. I guess you could call it a civil war breaks out. And Maxentius, who was a powerful general, still wasn't enough to overtake Constantine and his soldiers. So this battle takes place called the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. Now, this Milvian Bridge still exists to this day. You can go there. You can go stand on this bridge.
Yeah, I mean, I was amazed to see like video footage and photographs of this bridge that was literally built probably previous to 300 AD.
Yeah.
Like that's incredible.
They don't build things like they used to, man.
No, that engineering is amazing.
It is. And I mean, that's why it's like when people are always, when we're talking about Jesus and like the nativity and how almost it looks like everyone was like a shepherd or something back in the day. It's like, boy, the Roman Empire was flourishing. Like it was probably one of the craziest places that's ever existed in terms of like, imagine seeing that, you know, like sprawled out in front of you, like the empire. Like what did Rome look like? It looked amazing, you know? So this battle of the Milvian Bridge between Maxentius and Constantine, Maxentius gets defeated, ends up, I guess, drowning in this river. And so what does Constantine do? Constantine has his head removed and shows his head in front of everyone, which is what warlords do, basically. And, you know, starts calling this guy a tyrant. Now, what's weird is that Constantine, as he's ruling, he absorbs Maxentius's soldiers. There, a lot of Christian historians think that Constantine was Christian. They think that he became Christian because of this battle. That he had a vision of the cross in the sky. He goes and after he's praying all devoutly, he has this vision. He starts painting crosses on people's shields. His warriors go out there and defeat the tyrant Maxentius.
I
But
think
there are
didn't he even have like a dream or something where Jesus came to him?
This was the vision.
This was the
I'm not
vision. Okay.
I'm not sure if it was a dream and a vision or just a vision, but they usually call it Constantine's vision.
I see. Yeah.
So he has this vision, you know, and it's a defeat for Maxentius. Now, any ruler who's absorbing an army is going to be getting information about what their common beliefs are, right? And a lot of people think that it's this like this guy is becoming devout and he's seeing things and because he's seeing things that he is special and has this like right to rule. I mean, even the way Christians describe this vision is, and no offense to anyone, I really like, please don't take offense to this, but it seems a little naive to me when we're looking at Roman Empire, like Roman emperors on a whole. Okay, so here's an excerpt from Christian History Institute. Okay, accordingly, Constantine called on him with earnest prayer to reveal to him who he was and stretch forth his right hand to help him in his present difficulties. Now, this is Constantine praying, right? And while he was thus praying with fervent entreaty, a most extraordinary sign appeared to him from heaven, something which it might have been hard to believe had the story been told by any other person. But since the victorious emperor himself long afterwards declared it to the writer of this history, when he was honored with his acquaintance and society and confirmed his statement by an oath, who could hesitate to believe it, especially since other testimonies have established its truth? He said that about noon, when the day was already beginning to decline, he saw with his own eyes the sign of a cross of light in the heavens above the sun, and bearing the inscription, quote, "By this symbol you will conquer." He was struck with amazement by the sight, and his whole army witnessed the miracle. Because that happens.
Sounds like a children's book. It's just
right.
Yeah.
So in this excerpt, they mention this person, the writer of this history. So who was the writer of this history? Well, it was a guy named Eusebius, I believe his name was, from Caesarea. But Constantine brings in this this right-hand man who is informing him on Christianity, on the Christian belief system. So he's doing his due diligence and finding out about it. Now, the first writing of the events that took place at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, there was no mention of this vision. Later on, Constantine had this written into the history, and Eusebius then told everyone in Christendom about this and spread it to everyone. So
Yep.
that is a little bit strange to begin with, right? Like we're seeing some indications of him playing the game, so to speak.
Yeah, it's cracking. Yeah, the other evidence begins to crack the narrative. Well, the victor writes the history books, so you
Right.
might as well make
And
yourself look good.
might as well make yourself look good, especially when you see a growing number of Christians. Christianity isn't going anywhere. More and more people are practicing Christianity, and he sees this happening across the empire. So if you can't control it, persecution didn't work. Why not embrace it? When Constantine was in power, he creates this thing called the Arch of Constantine, right? He wedges the Arch of Constantine between a few different like important things in Rome, but it's right next to the Colosseum. So the Arch of Constantine goes up right next to the Colosseum, and he takes like scenes from previous monuments and puts them on this arch. For 30 years, no one was even able to get close to this thing. People were worried that it would get destroyed, right?
For 30 years, really?
Recently for 30 years, like no one was able to get close to this, but recently people have been allowed to kind of go in and take more record of like what was on there, right? Now, the Arch, of course, shows all of these amazing scenes from Constantine's rule and from his definitive Battle of the Milvian Bridge, right? So, if he was really a Christian, you would expect that when people finally got close to this arch, that they would see all kinds of evidence of a devout Christian, as it was explained in this, Christian History Institute article. There was not one Christian symbol on this arch. And furthermore, there was all kinds of evidence of of pagan gods in many of these different scenes.
And this was literally an arch that Constantine commissioned.
Yes.
Yes.
Right next to
So
the Colosseum.
right next to the Colosseum. Yeah.
Furthermore, John, the Flavians were some of the biggest persecutors of Christians. The biggest
Oh,
persecutors of Christians.
Constantine had Flavius on his name, right? Like he had
He
it.
yes.
Yeah.
He actually put this name in his name to give, some kind of hat tip to the Flavians. So some sources say like that he was born Flavius, but even still, if the Flavians were the biggest persecutors of Christians and you're calling yourself Christian, you'd probably nix that name from existence, right? Because like why be associated with them? But he's, proudly kind of flouting this name. And I mean, what does that mean? I mean, what does this really mean? He's got pagan symbolism in there. All the shields. Now, remember, in this vision, he sees the vision of the cross. There was no scene on there of him seeing a vision at all. So there's no reference to it on the arch, which you'd think that he would have on there. And the shields that were said to have been painted with a cross, there's all of the shields do not have crosses on them.
Right. Well,
None of
yeah, I
them.
mean, just the whole fact that he's got other gods there, clearly portrayed gods from the past, plural, would be heathenistic in Christianity, and he wouldn't put it there. He just wouldn't. He couldn't. There's no way. So, I mean, right there, it shows you what his belief system actually was.
And at the very least, it shows you that this was a transition period where everything was accepted at this time, right? But he is making absolutely no reference to any type of Christian belief here. Yeah.
Right.
Which it's pretty strange. But he's doing a lot of work to have it rewritten into the history of what really happened at that battle. So we've got a lot of different things going on here, and we have this pagan symbolism that kind of keeps coming up. Now, and so now we've got some scenes with Apollo on the arch. Behind this arch in the ancient past, when Constantine was ruling, he had a 12-meter tall statue of himself put behind the arch. And there are marks on they still have the head from this statue. It was a big statue. And there are entry points for these beams to be coming out of his head. So in the time that he's ruling, he's got beams coming out of his head as if he's like a god, or sort of like the avatar of Apollo here on Earth. Right. But what's also strange is it's not just Apollo that has these beams that come out of his head. There are other pagan gods that are also the god of the sun, where there are beams coming out of their head like this. And the most notable one is the god Mithra. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but the ruling elite at the time, all were devout to this thing that was called the cult of Mithraism. And they're finding now that where these churches were built, these Christian churches where like the soldiers were worshiping, that there were smaller temples built near those churches for the elites who were still worshiping Mithraism to have their rituals in there.
Right. So so you're talking about a Christian church, and underneath it, you've got a Mithraic temple.
All across the Roman Empire.
Right.
The massive Roman Empire. We're talking about Christian churches with secret, hidden Mithraism churches or temples, whatever you want to call them. Who was this god? Mithra is the question next, right?
Yeah, Mithra was thought to be a deity, a god, one of the many gods that come out of Zoroastrianism, primarily out of Iran. I mean, this is actually a little bit contested. If you get into the people who are studying history on this matter, there are some facets who contest this and don't necessarily think that it came out of Zoroastrian. But the thing is that when you get into the symbology of Mithra, so he's the main thing that they focus on is the act of him killing a bull. Right, that's like their iconography. That's their main iconography, and Mithra's there. He's looking away from the bull in some kind of sorrow, and he's got the sun coming, out of his head. And next to him, in some of the iconography, is Osiris. Literally, Osiris is next to him
The
from
god of the sun.
Exactly, the god of the sun from Egyptian mythology. So their whole thing is about this god who killed the bull, and they relate this killing of the bull as part of a sacrifice that they also partake in order to, I guess, have their sins cleaned out, right? So you start to see these parallels in Mithraic beliefs with Christian beliefs. Now, we don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg here, or we don't know what's going on the surface.
Yeah.
But what's really, fascinating here is that these types of ceremonies were occurring in concurrence with the Christian ceremonies. And the thing with Mithraism is that it was, at least at the end of it, it was a religion, a cult that noblemen, kings, and warriors subscribe to, right? So you have this, in a sense, secret society around it that is not of the masses of people. The masses of people are shifting towards Christianity, while these people still held to the old gods. And these people were the ones that conquered lands, the ones that were the rulers. So you've got this really interesting and strange juxtaposition of these two things sort of like next to each other.
Yeah.
That right there is the most interesting and curious thing about this whole thing. And the fact that Mithraism literally goes back and pulls from other ancient religions. It's the pantheon of gods here we're talking about. So this is the most fascinating thing about it to me.
Well, yeah, and just based off of a few things that you just said, to fill everyone in a little bit, why was Osiris seen with Mithra? It's because the slaying of the bull and the blood from the bull was supposed to be a resurrection of oneself. And so,
There you go. Yeah.
right. So for these soldiers who are going into battle constantly, we're talking about the Roman Empire. So it's an empire of conquering. They're going into battle. They don't know whether they're going to live the next day. You know, this idea of resurrecting is a really important one for them because they want to believe that they can come back somehow, even if it's in an afterlife, right? So they're devoting them. They're devoted to this Mithra character or this Osiris character or both. And then we see that Apollo is also involved in this somehow. Are they all the same? I mean, we don't know.
Right.
Right.
Right. This is where it gets absolutely fascinating because they're living in a world in a time that's changing and shifting to, I would say, henotheism, not polytheism. Henotheism is the picking of one god and putting that as superior to the other gods while you're forgetting about the rest. Henotheistic religion, and that's what I find most fascinating because this is like the turning point here on the earth of shifting. People call it monotheistic, but really it's henotheistic because those other gods were still being worshipped, right? And those other gods were ones that came out of Egypt, ones that came out of all of the old lore, right? You've got even Ra. They even have spoken about Ra, which I find fascinating because Amen, Amen, Ra, right? And what do Christians say? Amen.
I know. I could never
Right.
figure
So
it
you're
out.
getting this like mixing beginning to occur, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? Like one of the strangest things I found about Mithraism is that it was like the OG secret society. They refused to write anything out. They had degrees of sort of, what do you call that? Like Masonic degrees? Yeah, degrees of ascension, I guess, within the Mithra or Mithraism cult, and they would not talk about it. They would not write it down outside of their meetings. So we have very little written evidence of the Mithraism cult, but we do have temples and statues that show these things in other symbols. And one of those symbols is this hat. I don't recall what the name of this hat is, but it's like the Smurf hat.
I'd cure Hefty of his rudeness, clumsy of his clumsiness. I'd make every Smurf perfect, like me. That's it. That's exactly what I'll do.
It's the Phrygian hat. So this is what it looks like for anyone who's wondering. There's a bunch of different depictions of this and a lot of different art. But anytime you see this hat, we're talking about the elites who were a part of this Mithraism cult.
Yes, Papa Smurf.
It's Bob Smurf. Anyone who was a part of these cult activities and these elites would wear these all the time, would have this front forward facing hat. And that would show you what their belief truly was. This Arch of Constantine that we see, that you can get close enough to see, has figures in it, and they have these hats on them. He was
Yeah.
clearly saying what he believed in the symbolism of the arch.
Right. Right. I mean, even later on, when you get into some of the Renaissance paintings and the three wise men, right?
They have
That
those
were
too.
headed, they're wearing those hats.
Yeah, and now why is that relevant? Well, the magi's, these magi's were considered to be coming from the east, right? And the Mithraism cult was strongest in the East. So the idea was that these either Christianity was highly infiltrated by this, or they didn't know any better and they just thought these were three wise men from a previous sort of culture. I mean, that's also a possibility, right? They're kind of everywhere. And I mean, it does make sense that the elites would be practicing something other people were not aware of. You know, it's a quiet thing while they're observing what's happening here. This is the Arch of Septimius Severus. This character here was also a Roman emperor, Septimius Severus. So that just shows evidence that this thing was everywhere in that culture. I think laying the foundation of this emperor Constantine, who he was, and I think the question really is, or that we have at the end of this was this guy really playing the crowd? Was he just being smart, seeing a growing Christianity, and he was trying to embrace this and take control of it? Or was he actually a devout Christian who had an amazing vision, which gave him a definitive win over Maxentius? And so what, John, I think you guys looked into this vision. Like what happened here?
Yeah, the remote viewing data surrounding the vision was nothing. Nothing. I mean, he did not, as far as I can see in the data, there was no vision. There was no vision at all. In fact, it was like the data went to basically talking about an idea of engineering minds, engineering people with specific ideas, rather than anything like actually happening. There was no like spiritual thing going on. There was no nothing. I mean, I don't even know what to say. It was just blank. It was just empty, and instead going the path of like what we would call social engineering ultimately. So I would say that, according to the data, no, he didn't have a vision. This did not happen. He was obviously, when you look at the temple construct or the arch construct and what's in there, that was his spirituality. That was his line. It wasn't Christianity. That was done for the people. That was done for something totally different.
There have been so many paintings about Constantine and him having these visions in like throughout the Renaissance. I mean, we're talking about massive commissioned paintings here that people have been looking at for years and years, and none of it happened.
These paintings, they were basically it was like the entertainment of the time. It was the newspaper of the time. Ultimately,
Right.
The paintings. It's like, this is how you get people to just embed it in their mind and think it's from the past, truly from the past, because that's how people communicated. So, it's like TV, right? I mean, if I lived back then, I would just be standing in front of these paintings, just imagining what happened. This is what they told me what happened. It's like our current news media. They can't lie to you, right? So we think. They tell you the truth. This is the truth. So, but it wasn't true. No, not at all.
There's a good one right there. This is
It's
Raphael.
A painting, man.
Yeah. I mean, it's an amazing painting. Like, how could you not like want to believe that this happened after looking at this painting? And like, Raphael wasn't like like this guy was like legit. I mean, he's one of the best in history, Yeah. And I mean, there it is. Like he's seeing this cross in the sky. He's having this like amazing supernatural experience. This is so meaningful to the Christian world because Constantine is the one that ended the persecution of the Christians, which is a good thing. I mean, that is a good thing that he did. I don't want to take away from that. However, was he doing it because there was no controlling Christian growing? It was Christians that ended it. Like giving this to Constantine instead of it being like, no, we actually ended this because we grew too much.
Right. Well, I mean, think about the Vikings and the Norsemen when Christianity began to get introduced to them. I mean, they viewed Christianity as something that's trying to kill their way of life, kill their gods,
Right.
right? And I imagine that was the same attitude of any pre-Christian culture and Christianity coming in, that they felt as though they were going to end up killing their gods off and their belief system. So, I, you know, there's going to be some of them who want to protect that,
Well, yeah. I mean, everybody protects their
their belief system.
belief system. Yeah. I mean, I've talked to all kinds of different people of different faiths, and a common thread among them are like, oh, if you don't believe this, you can't be saved, or you can't go to heaven, or whatever it is. And it's like, what do you say to that? You just,
Well, belief systems become part of our self-identity. And if that identity is challenged, that makes you disappear, and you're going to fight to survive the challenging of your own identity, right? This is at least you can look at it a couple different ways, but from the perspective of the everyday person, how do you get people involved in warring in general? Well, you have another culture challenge their belief system. I mean, not it's a little bit different these days, but in the past it was like this culture and these two cultures have different ideas about how to live, and so it's going to challenge belief systems. And that's how you get people into war. They're trying to change the way you live, which is an affront to your own identity. And if you don't have that identity, you don't exist. So we got to fight and kill so that we can retain this idea of what we are.
Well, you guys, we're coming to an end on this episode. However, in our next episode, we are going to get into some really, really crazy conversations, because we're going to talk about the Council of Nicaea. We're going to talk about what really happened there, this battle that, over Christendom, really. And then we're going to get into the dates and the symbols within Christianity, and Christmas specifically, how Saturnalia relates to it. And then are there even more nefarious, more ancient things that have come into play here? So if you're interested in this episode, please let us know. We'd love to know what you guys think. Of course, this is I would have to say, when you're dealing with history, especially ancient history like this, I think we've done our legwork here, but there's so much involved that you can never have the entire full picture. So just take this with a grain of salt and let us know if we missed anything. And in a future episode, you never know, we might get back to this. So we'll definitely um, bring it back in if we've missed something. But John, thanks so much for being with us. And for those of you at home, we hope you thought this episode was as out of this world as we did.